And I never had such intense and deep learnings and getting to know myself as when burnouts were happening, or in phases of my life which were triggered by burnout. I know burnout sounds bad, but it can happen. It's okay to happen, because we just sometimes get exhausted because we were excited in the beginning, or we had bad conditions, or we had just too much to do, whatever. But it's a crisis that I think can be used in such a nice way to help us further in life.
Hi, I'm Mike Green, and welcome to Understanding Users, the podcast where I chat candidly with UX design and research professionals from around the world to hear about how they build digital products and services in a user-centered way. So I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast Tina Lickova. Tina was a recent guest, and I enjoyed speaking to her hugely and got lots of positive feedback from listeners about the kind of episode we put out. So she's kindly agreed to come back and have a chat. And this time we want to talk about the topic of researcher burnout in particular, something that will be familiar to user researchers and digital folks involved in research, no doubt, around the world. You know, what is it? Why does it happen? How can you avoid it happening? And, you know, what advice can we and others give to those perhaps new to the profession, perhaps experienced in the profession, who are suffering from it? So without further ado, welcome back, Tina. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's kick off then. Burnout. I think it's fair to say a good number of us have suffered from it or experienced it at some point as researchers in our career. How would you describe it? Tell me more about it from your perspective, Tina.
Well, I can maybe then later talk about how I experienced it. But as a matter of fact, I have been having a talk in the Slovak UX community about burnout, because that is the one that we were founding years ago. And what I found out that burnout is something that was actually specified in the 70s already. There were some psychologists putting a label on it as a burnout. As well, even Shakespeare supposedly is mentioning something like burnout. So it's nothing really new, people have been exhausted before. And when I was reading about it, it's just unbelievable looking at the numbers and statistic as well, what it really is. The definition goes, I think it has three or four components to it. I found interesting that it's not just exhaustion, but it's negativism comes to strongly into it. And with that negativism, also some kind of cynicism, which I find interesting as well. And maybe the last thing that I'm going to mention for the start is that allegedly 40% of people in the Western civilization, because the research that I was going through was from Western countries, do somehow suffer under burnout or have burnout or are in different stages of burnout, which I found like, okay, if you're such a fatalist as I am, that's almost a half of the workforce going through, some kind of burnout.
So we're talking about the adult workforce, the adult population,
Yeah.
40%.
Yeah.
That's a scary statistic, isn't it? And it's, as you've kind of touched on it begs a whole series of other questions. To what extent is this a new phenomenon or not? The first thing that jumps to my mind, of course, is the tech world that we work in is, and therefore as a result, society as a whole is accelerating the amount of knowledge that we're supposed to accumulate is increasing kind of exponentially, and it's impossible to keep on top of it all of the time and learn new things and keep ahead. And social media, I think, doesn't help, does it? And there's a sense that, it's kind of overwhelming, that the amount of information coming at you. whether it be in person or these days more often kind of working remotely. Is that fair to
Yeah.
say?
Yeah. And it's not even of course, the amount of information, the amount of nudges you get through the day, Slack, other chats, emails, calls. But it's basically, and this is where I'm a strong fan of Basecamp and their approach to work, where they always say work doesn't happen in meetings. And everybody in the Western culture, especially in big companies, have this culture of meetings, meetings, meetings. Sometimes we have a meeting to organize another meeting, which then the big question is, okay, when there is actually time to work and be productive. And for researchers, of course, you have to have touch and be in touch with people and attend different meetings, but it's really a lot of work behind the scenes. And this is where I felt somehow that I was struggling when working in-house, that I had so many meetings that I felt like, oh, I don't have really time for actual work.
So what are the warning signs then, Tina, in your experience? What should one look out for to say I'm suffering from burnout?
Good question, because I think it's very individual. I loved one. Unfortunately, it's in Czech language, but there is a video of a psychologist who is taking care of health workers, and she's saying that the first stage of burnout is excitement. So, yeah. And I find it tricky because you have to be excited and have fun doing your job, but it's also kind of tricky if you put too much energy in the beginning into projects or roles, and then you just lose your energy on the go. So I would say, not a warning sign, but maybe finding your own way not to burst out of the energy in the beginning, which is my specialty. That's why I'm mentioning it. And the warning sign, from what I hear and what I experienced, are very different also for different genders or people of different communities. So and because they're coming also from different kind of reasons. So with men, it's more physical. With men, you hear more stories, or males, you hear more stories on, oh, I couldn't even get out of the bed suddenly. But the thing is, men are 5 to 7 years late for the doctor's appointment to actually talk about their burnouts, if it's a psychiatrist, psychologist, or a general practitioner. With women, it's more emotional. That's like women, supposedly, or females, have more, the symptoms are more emotional, going either into depression and then or into anger, but turn towards themselves. So it's more like the guilt and trying to repair themselves. And then another thing is, LGBTQI plus community has suffers under burnout a lot as well, because there is another 40% of people in Europe which feel they can't be themselves at work because of their sexual preferences or sexual orientation. And so, it's hard to say what it is. I know what was for me. Question maybe to you, what it as a male, what it, if you ever went through it or was near or hurt your other folks, what was it for you?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I was smiling, Riley, when you talked about men going late to the doctor. Men are notoriously bad about getting seen medically if they have problems. I mean, I guess there's various types of burnout. If we're just focusing on, I suppose, career burnout and work-related burnout, which is, I suppose what I'm referring to in the context of a job role. Yeah, I think it's the exhaustion, the physical exhaustion, and it's almost like wading through treacle. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but it's that the slightest thing becomes an effort to actually do. So you sort of, and I think if you reach the sense of complete overwhelm, you don't really do anything. You're sort of, catatonic, where you're like, I can't begin to do any number of you look at a to-do list and just think, I can't do any of that. happily, I don't, I'm like most people. Well, as a father, I've got two young children. My wife also works. I have, like all of us, we're juggling lots of balls. I don't think I've suffered serious career burnout, but I've been had a slightly enforced break over the last couple of months between contracts, and it's allowed me to kind of reflect, stepping back from the hamster wheel. And I've noticed, when I check LinkedIn, on my phone, or if I look at emails, that slight sense of anxiety comes back about, somebody else in your network might have posted something or be doing something, whether it be a podcast or a presentation or a new job role, that you sort of, is that kind of FOMO again. Whereas actually, for example, the last week I've just been painting one of the rooms in my house and I've not been on my phone at all. And I've literally just sort of digitally detoxed apart from listening to music on my phone. And it's been lovely. It's, it's a completely different realm. And so some of those feelings of anxiety and perhaps burnout and just stress, work fatigue, just dissipate a bit. I suppose like holidays, right? It's just taking time off. The key is, perhaps we all suffer a certain degree of burnout all the time. It's just having a holiday and taking time off. But the key when you take time off is to switch off, not look at Slack or your phone or just disconnect. And again, it's often said, but it's kind of harder to do.
Yeah. But it goes back to the definition of burnout in a way, because burnout doesn't have to be this, oh, this is really the end of the road and I can't stand from my bed, or I can't go to work and I'm completely paralyzed and overwhelmed and almost crying in meetings. Now I'm painting it really black. But it can be that you had enough, and it's not just the hamster wheel on its own with this. Definitely it's a big factor, the speed of things happening around you and how much is happening around you and what are you supposed to do, your amount of work. But it's also the kind of frustration that you have in work. People leave jobs because of bad bosses, and not being heard, not being seen in the workplace is also a factor where you just feel so frustrated. That was it, at least for me, where I was going from one job to another till I decided to go freelance because I just wasn't happy anymore being employed. And I was kind of scared of going freelance because of many reasons. But I was suffering because the kind of environment in corporation wasn't for me, out of different reasons. And some of the positions I was doing or roles were frustrating because of this. Oh, this is either a boss that I don't really have a good relationship with, or this is frustrating because I'm not seeing, not heard, because of different reasons. For researchers, it's the typical thing of, oh, it's taking so long, to deliver research, or why do we have to do this? Why just we can do a survey? So, fighting the same things all over again can bring you to a burnout as well, I guess.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, isn't it? And I wonder, I touched earlier on about kind of early career researchers versus, more experienced folks, perhaps, like ourselves. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on whether one group is more susceptible than another? I'm wondering, for example, do early career researchers, is there a greater chance of them being overwhelmed earlier on? Or is it a case of perhaps, somebody who's been around the block a bit and has done an awful lot of work in this space, are they more susceptible to it? I mean, I don't really know. What's your view?
I wouldn't know the answer as well. I think it's, again, very individual, because on one hand, as a junior, you probably don't yet have the work processes established for yourself. Prioritization and simplification of things might be, complicated for you, because this is the biggest thing you actually learn in your career. So you might do a lot of things but not enough deep, or just for not seeing that some of the things could be done differently, but you are overwhelmed. But on the other side, it's super exciting because you're learning so much. As in a senior role, you are usually also in a leader's position, at least as a expert lead. So you have to do a lot with other people, and you have to take a lot of responsibility, maybe in some roles a lot of pressure. So it's a different story as well. as in many companies, as a lead, you kind of still have to, conduct your own studies, not just supervise them. So it's just, switching modes, and that could be the hard one. So I really don't have an answer, because it could be different factors affecting in your well-being in the end.
And I think as you're talking, I'm thinking, support network is important. Like it is in any aspect of life. Having friends you can talk to, maybe in a personal sense or in a professional sense, or having colleagues that you can share perhaps some of the challenges you're facing in terms of burnout. And I guess as a freelancer, certainly I find that it's sometimes harder. My quote unquote colleagues tend to be kind of groups of contractors and freelancers I've worked with rather than the client, because obviously you move on from client to client. But it's how do you protect yourself from burnout as a freelancer, I suppose, is the question. And how do you do that?
Well, another great question, because I don't have an answer for it yet. And I highly doubt that I will have a clear answer and clear plan on how to not get into burnout. And that was also closing of my presentation to the community in Bratislava, that the question is if I ever will have a smaller or a bigger burnout in the future. And I think the answer is yes. It's just a matter of how far into it I will be able to say, oh, it's happening, and I should be slowing down or changing things. Because also what I heard, psychologists, of course, they tell to you you have to relax and take vacations and take breaks and take day offs from time to time. But they actually tell you it's not the best idea if you're in a burnout to go from 100% to zero, like do nothing, because actually you are still in a very nervous mode and you won't be able to do it, and you're putting more pressure onto you.
So to scale it down gradually rather than a sudden stop.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be with work, but you keep busy. I have a friend now who left a company, and I think she's going through a burnout because of relationships in the workplace, and how it was set up for her. And she's keeping busy, with things like arranging her apartment or stuff like that. Now she's traveling. And that could be also a way to keep busy, but not going into, I will meditate now, but I will go crazy.
And you raised that about people. I suppose, burnout can be caused by obviously a number of things. It can be people related, human related, in terms of the kind of networks we deal with, the people we work with, the politics of organizations, which can sadly still to this day be, toxic and disincentivizing, because you put humans together and there'll always be challenges. Or is it sort of processes or the work itself or the tools or the environment, the physical office environment or home environment? It's not always easy to, I guess, work out which of those are the main. Maybe it's a combination of all of them that leads to burnout.
Yeah, and in the end, it's then making maybe the work. Okay, what was it that actually led me to the burnout? Because if I see myself now, I have days where I have much more work than I was used to, and then I have days where I don't have anything. So it's freelance life. It's like exactly from zero to from 100% to nothing. But I'm more keen to be okay. Now I will read some book, a creamy, whatever, and spend time this way. And I feel more as in charge of my life, which gives me the energy to be more careful about my time, to plan it more, to have breaks more often if I can, to go for walks, So for me, it's the autonomy. To having the autonomy is making me happy, and I felt like I'm not having the autonomy being employed with the structures that I was employed in. But I had, for example, work where I was kind of having a boss who was like, okay, this is your goal. How do you get there? Is your way, And it felt like this. what I'm experiencing now. So because of the autonomy. But it could be that somebody doesn't need the autonomy, but somebody needs, I don't know, a flexibility of time and security with it, like working moms or working dads, you know. And if that is not delivered to you, it can be very frustrating and leading to a burnout. That will be my hypothesis.
You've talked there about a number of coping strategies, I suppose, you know, taking time for a walk, just switching off. You know, what are your other key strategies for dealing with it? So if you sense burnout coming, I mean, what advice would you give to others, let's say, in terms of how to deal with burnout?
I'm I'm struggling with giving advice going through 4 burnouts, being under 40. So please, anybody listening to it will be like, okay, I will learn from this woman because she actually made so many mistakes that I can learn from her mistake and not from mine. But now, for example, from the last burnout, which happened 2 years ago, 2 years ago, I went into therapy again, which is helping me a lot. And burnout is a strong kind of topic that we always go back to, and I always feel I'm finding there new things for me, I am figuring out slowing down is something that helps me a lot, but it's super hard for me as well. So before it was meditation, and now I'm not really good in meditating that much as I was used to. It's not such a strong habit. But even just to slow down physically, walk slowly through the apartment, reminding myself, like, you don't have to rush this. So that's really the basics, because even my thinking is sometimes really fast. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, I have to slow it down here. And what helps me with that the most is going through the body, move. I'm not saying sports, because if you are really tired and exhausted, you don't want to probably do CrossFit or anything like that. It helps me maybe in some certain, but really having a regular movement, if it's yoga, if it's walks, if it's whatever makes you happy, that is something that will be maybe not advice, but a recommendation to turn from your head into your body. Um, and then finding, because one of the questions that I gave to the audience in the presentation was shooting it back to them, and people were looking, staring at me for a few seconds, like that. What are you just trying to ask us? Was I was asking them, how do you relax? A lot of people don't know, and I didn't know either. And now I am looking for ways of, oh, this is how I relax. And this is how I relax in this time or at this moment. So, really shut up, like you were, painting a wall and listening to music.
The example I always use is Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow, and I don't know if you've read it. But lots of people have. For those who haven't, he won the Nobel Prize with Amos Tversky, his colleague, for behavioral economics, I think it was. But it's a summary, isn't it, of his life's work as basically a psychologist. And the bit that always stuck in my head was he said every morning he used to go for a walk around the hills behind where he worked with his colleague and professional kind of companion.
Yeah.
And
Get a dog for that.
every morning they used to go for a walk, and that sort of got the creative juices flowing, and they'd come back and they'd sit down, they'd be able to do much more productive work as a result of that. But that's hard to do. I mean, I think I've got a dog, and it's quite nice to get out in the morning, walk the dog. But again, to find time, you have to be quite religious with some of this stuff, don't you? To create the habit to do it, to give you the space to think, because life is hectic.
And the other way is if you are a habit person, because in the productivity world and performance world that we live, everything kind of could become something of you becoming the perfect human. And for example, I'm not good with routines. That's why I don't have or now I have, but I will no longer have a stable fitness center. But I am switching between, through an app, because I need kind of the variability and flexibility. and that is making me happy. So, you know, having habits, but just really, and this is what I am trying to get from therapy, is tuning into myself and feeling, okay, now I am exhausted, or not even exhausted, but I need to sit down and just stare into the wall, and that will make me happy. Just exaggerating, but you know, giving yourself time. And what I also heard from some psychologists is, yeah, vacations are great, but if you work your ass off for half a year and then go for 3 weeks of vacations where you do a bike trip, then and you don't do even breaks or don't take a weekend off or whatever, it's not going to help you.
What about the pandemic? As we're talking, I'm thinking, you know, the pandemic, evidence, more and more evidence is coming to light of the mental health effects, you know, downsides on children and adults and the population. I'm wondering in terms of the working world, because, you know, I had done a fair amount of remote research prior to the pandemic, but still a lot of my work was physically going into people's workplaces of work and homes and you know, talk to them. And then suddenly overnight, bang, all of that stops. And like all of us, we had to pivot at great speed into a different way of working. And in some ways it's never recovered. And as a result, we spend all our times on Teams meetings or Zoom calls and, you know, even collaborative exercises are now done on tools like Miro or Mural, you know, these collaborative whiteboarding tools online, because we're all dislocated and, you know, spread around. I'm wondering that from a burnout perspective, I'm sure for me, that's had an impact. You know, it's more tiring working like that in many ways. If you disregard the time taken to commute in, for example, I have a sort of half-hour, 40-minute commute into London. That's tiring. But the flip side is when I'm there, I'm physically with people and we can kind of co-create in a different way. But if you spend all day, every day sitting online, talking to people and collaborating online, that's also at risk of burning you out, I think. Do you agree?
Again, depending from people to people, I hear it a lot from people. So I think, oh, it's definitely a thing. For me, since the pandemic, it allowed me to go freelance and have clients in different countries right now. And if I need to be there, I just travel for, you know, once a few months. But for me, I am happy that way. Pandemic showed me that it's doable differently. But of course, you have to have, you know, the free time. I have the luxury of having a dog, so I have to go out even if I don't want to find the time, even if it's 5 minutes. But also the 5 minutes will give you some new impulses. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm feeling like, yeah, it's a thing, but not partially. It might be happening to me, but not really. Maybe if I could have a question, because you were talking about or asking me about my tools, and you were also telling that you didn't really encounter a burnout per se or something that you would label as a big burnout. So what are your coping mechanisms of not getting there?
A good question. I think it's a variety of things. I think it's, you know, I have little sort of different compartments in my head. So there's, you know, stuff related to the family, which is obviously a key thing, you know, looking after my children, helping working with my wife on that and spending time with her. There's the fresh air and exercise bit. There's the work bit, and it's kind of juggling all of them. But I certainly think the fresh air and exercise bit, for example, I love road biking and I go out my road bike twice a week. And I notice the weeks that I don't go out, I feel much kind of angstier and more, I don't know, like not on edge, but I'm less relaxed, like just going out in the fresh air again, even if it's in the dark. I mean, I don't go out in the rain, but assuming it's not too awful outside, because obviously it's winter time at the moment. That's one of my coping mechanisms. And I come back feeling better, just getting the endorphins going, getting, you know, cycling through fresh air, particularly because I live in the country, down some country lanes. But I think part of it is identifying the warning signs as they're coming and responding to them and not leaving it till it's too late, because you don't want to get to a stage where you have to go and see a doctor, really. Obviously, you want to be able to. And I wonder whether, for me, I mean, I said it before, it's that deluge of information. So like I said, I've had a couple of months off work, and even just diving back in infrequently to sort of the the endless scroll of whether it be X or whether it be LinkedIn or whatever. There's so much information coming at you. It's kind of like everyone's got some new thing they want to pitch. Everyone's got some new tool they want to talk about. You can't, the human brain can't possibly keep up with that. And I think, modern life is taxing cognitively. I think part of the problem is recognizing that and just saying, I'm feeling burnt out. Burnout is a real thing. I mean, I was going to say earlier, as you were talking, one of the things that perhaps people are reluctant to confess to it or to admit they have a problem. And that's not a criticism. That's just I suppose it's human nature. And also in a professional environment, perhaps you don't want to say, hang on a minute, I'm struggling a bit here. Because not all organizations want to hear that, right?
And to go a little bit deeper in that question, how would you say there are two open doors? One, but I will stick to what I wanted to ask. How would you say, as a researcher, you are trying to take care of yourself?
There's sort of macro and micro, I suppose. That the micro is, say around a research, building in little things like not agreeing to do too much work. I've made that mistake in the past. You come into a piece of work, you want to deliver, you want to be showing your value. So, and particularly with perhaps less experienced product managers or teams, or particularly organizational leaders, they want the magic bullet. They want as much research done as fast as possible, and it's having the confidence to push back and say, we can't do that much. We can't gather that much insight in the time you want, or we're not going to get the quality of the insight you want. So I think, little things like not scheduling back-to-back research sessions across a day. I've done that in the past. We have 5 or 6 sessions a day, and it becomes very, very tiring. And that's a classic. I think you can get burnt out very quickly doing that. So, allowing time. I mean, there was a LinkedIn, again, I spend too much time on LinkedIn, but there was an image I saw of 2 brain scans, the side-by-side pictures of people. You probably saw it. Someone who'd been in back-to-back meetings all day long online, it was on Zoom, and someone who'd had 10, 15 minutes between each meeting. And the brain activity was clearly very different. And the researchers were kind of suggesting that the importance of having a bit of a break to kind of reset and just take a breather before your next kind of online calls. You're not constantly jumping from meeting to meeting. Well, I think talking to other researchers as well, well, not even researchers, other people on your team. I've been lucky to work in the last few pieces of work I've done with great teams, a number of people I've worked with on previous pieces of work as well. So we kind of know how each other thinks, we know how each other works. And having, not a moan, perhaps, just let off steam, obviously not within the ears of certain individuals, but, basically just sharing pains and frustrations. And I mean, that's where retros come in, right? You have a retro at the end of the sprint, and you can kind of, as long as it's a trustworthy environment and you feel safe, voicing your opinion, that can be very important as well to avoid. For teams feeling run down, if one person's feeling burnt out, the chances are it's going to impact the rest of the team. But they might not realize that. So kind of being open and upfront and saying, hey guys, I'm struggling a bit at this point, I think is valuable in helping the rest of the team acknowledge that perhaps there's a problem. Yeah, and that's again, I suppose, where the freelance thing is not always the easiest, because you're parachuted into a situation where you're not necessarily part of an established team. You're the sort of gun for hire, and you may not have those existing relationships. So if you were going to sum up then, Tina, everything we've talked about, like I'm going to be really annoying and say one takeaway for those listening to this from your own experiences of burnout, what would you say?
I mean, we haven't been talking about it, but burnouts are personal crisis. And I never had such intense and deep learnings and getting to know myself as when burnouts were happening, or in phases of my life which were triggered by burnout. I know burnout sounds bad, but it can happen. It's okay to happen, because we just sometimes get exhausted because we were excited in the beginning, or we had bad conditions, or we had just too much to do, whatever. But it's a crisis that I think can be used in such a nice way to help us further in life.
That's a really positive take on that. I like that. I think it's a really nice, upbeat way to perhaps draw this together. Is out of the challenges come, the positives, the lessons learned, the benefits. And the key is taking those negatives and turning them into positives. My takeaway would be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up over things, because there will always be people who either actually or claim to work faster, harder, know more, deliver more, than you, have read more, use more tools than you do. And it's easy to get caught up on that kind of, I need to spin the wheels faster, but actually just not, and saying it's okay to not do that and take a step back, I think is, On that note, I'm going to say thank you so much. This has been a very illuminating chat, and thank you for kind of sharing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Understanding Users. If you enjoyed what you heard, do please like or comment wherever you're listening, and feel free to share this episode more widely. And feel free, of course, to drop me a line with any feedback via LinkedIn or my website, researchable.uk. Join me again next time when I'll be sharing some more insights from digital design professionals. Until then, stay safe and stay user-centered.